background. So actually, I've been in Agile for about I guess approaching, wow, I'm 8 years in. Wow. This is my third career. I've only actually been at Nike for almost 4 years now. But I was a bartender for about a decade, and then I got into journalism. I worked at National Public Radio, as Star mentioned, for about 7 years, and I met my wife there, and we decided to have a family. We moved back to Portland, where we both had from, basically. And a couple of years later, a buddy of mine from NPR called up and said, "Hey, my dad's this business guru, and he's got all this thought leadership he wants to put up on a website to sell it. Can you use your journalism skills to like manage the content and basically be the product owner for the website?" And I said, "That's awesome, better than waiting tables." And so that guy turned out to be Jeff Sutherland, who I'd never heard of. I'd never heard of Scrum before. I'd never worked in project management before.
Okay.
So I had the privilege of just, kind of coming into it completely cold and just really looking at the content that Jeff had created with Ken over the years. And I put that up on the website. And after doing that, I'm like, I love it. This is awesome. This is the way everybody should be working. So then I started doing trainings with Jeff, CSMs and CSPOs. I did that for a couple of years. And then I was like, great, I read about it and I taught it, but I've never done it. So then I asked to be a transformation, to get in the consulting arm at Scrum Inc. there. And I did a couple of transformations, and then I got to do one end to end, essentially. And after traveling 40 weeks a year plus for a couple of years, I wanted to have a young family and wanted to be at home. So I looked for a job in my backyard and found one at Nike. And so that's how I and I met both Roland and Star through Nike, and Francisco and Ruth, all through my Nike connection. So that's how I ended up here today, just so you have some context. So I'll talk about right? So if you think about a mindset, right, is really built on values and principles. And that's why we have an Agile mindset, because we have Agile values and principles. And so if we think about how the Agile values and principles play out, my favorite Agile value is the first Agile value, which is we all know individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And then how do we sort the principles that fit under that, right? So quite a few principles. I am sharing my screen. Am I?
Not yet.
No,
Nope.
not yet.
Can you share? There you go.
Yeah, hold on. Let me, I got to optimize for standby. Where did I go? Stop and then share again. Share. Okay. All right. And where did my audience go? There you guys all are. Awesome. Okay. So we have our first Agile. You're all seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. So we have our first Agile Manifesto value, which we're all very familiar with: individuals and interactions over processes and tools. I often say that the reason why this is so valuable is that we're trying to solve complex problems. In order to solve a complex problem, you need a very high level of communication saturation, and the best form of communication is face-to-face communication. And so that's why individuals and interactions is what we really want to lean into, because we're trying to solve a complex problem, and we need to communicate about that, get a lot of different perspectives on that. Rather than I was just giving a stakeholder training, how to be a stakeholder of an Agile team. And they were literally giving the Agile team like 100 lines a week of requests. And so I was trying to get them to back off and use the conversation with the product owner rather than a bunch of JIRA tickets. So the principles, as I would sort them, obviously, right, everybody's got a different take on them a little bit. Is building projects around motivated individuals, right? Mastery and autonomy and purpose, trust, all the things that we really value in Agile. If we build that around that if we focus on the team, value will naturally come off the team, right? That's kind of what that's getting at. The best work emerges from self-organizing teams is that we don't go looking for problems emerge. And so if we focus on the problem itself, the team can form around that. Same with architecture. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information is face-to-face, very much what I was just saying about the complex problems. sustainable work, right? We want to do this forever. It's value, right? It's a product. We should be able to always do this. We're not doing death marches. We're not order takers. We're not mercenaries, right? We're missionaries that we truly believe in our product. And because of that, we're going to do that at a pace that we find can offer the most valuable value over the long haul. And then finally, here we get at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective and tunes and adjusts behavior accordingly, right? So that is our 12th principle, right? And I actually find it a little ironic that it's the 12th principle because I am willing to posit that it is the essence of agility, this 12th principle, and I'll make my case to the jury here in a second. But before I make my case to the jury, where do we think it happens? Where does that 12th principle really come into play when we look at the Scrum framework? What ceremonies?
The retrospective.
Retrospective,
sure.
Yeah. Anywhere
also
else?
in the sprint review.
Yes, exactly. Took me, actually, I was preparing for this and I was like, a lot of the things I was going to talk about kind of happened in the sprint review. And I was like, is that really what it was getting at? But I think it is, right? I think we really reflect and tune based on the what, and we reflect and tune based on the how, right? And I often view the sprint review as really the what retrospective, and then the retrospective itself is the how retrospective. So I think that principle really is looking at these two elements in the Scrum process, both the sprint review and the retrospective.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on that? Or I really actually spent a little time thinking about that, and I feel comfortable with that conclusion, but I wonder if anybody else had different thoughts.
Oh, so Joel, if I can answer a question.
Yeah.
So so one of the principles is talking about the face-to-face interaction. It's very critical. So I'm wondering, like principle 6, right? So during the COVID, it's impossible to meet your team. The best we can do is Zoom, virtual. So how do you think we can overcome this challenge? Like, how is that, like, we cannot overcome this until we go back to that really co-location, like physically?
I mean, I think that we would just have to, it's a reality. It's a fact that we have to deal with, right? So I think that we need to be leveraging, and maybe we can think about it as leveraging the highest fidelity form of communication that is possible. And I think if you look at it that way, then, I mean, I have to admit, like when it happened, I was like, this is going to be a disaster. I don't even know what I'm going to do. Like we're losing the first value. I don't know what to do. And I have to so I'm not building software in a team. I'm not solving a complex problem with a cross-functional team, right, in my work. So that caveat, but I have to admit, pretty good Zoom. It's pretty close. I mean, I just do meetings. I do a lot of one-on-one, so it's perfect. Even with trainings, I have found that it's a very close facsimile. Like even when I'm delivering, even to blank screens, sometimes it feels similar to how I trained in person. So first of all, I just the tools are way better than I imagined. And I think we also just have all adapted. I think, if we have if you're a cross-functional team solving a complex problem, if you have the camera on the whole time and you can just literally turn to the screen and talk to someone, I think, right? Feedback is what really everything thrives on in a complex world. And so if I can get feedback very quickly, right? That's why we like face-to-face communication, because it's synchronous, right? It happens in the same moment, right? It's not a Slack, it's not an email where we have to wait a day or 5 minutes before we get an answer, right? That's what slows us down. So if we can get that synchronous feedback, I think we're getting close to what we need. And I think Zoom actually does it's pretty decent. Like I said, I have to admit that I'm pretty shocked how good it is.
Thanks.
Hey, Joel, I'll throw out there as well that I think the daily stand-up is also that time to reflect on terms of, hey, what did we do yesterday? What are we doing today? And talk about roadblocks. Like there's just a little bit of that enough so the team could check and adjust for that day. So I think that's also
that's perfect. That's absolutely right. I mean, Jeff always talks about the daily stand up as an opportunity to inspect and adapt on a daily basis, right? And I think reflect and tune is exactly what inspect and adapt is, right? So really, that's why I think in some ways, I'll make my case here to the jury, but I think that's why it is the essence of agility is to inspect and adapt, and reflect and tune is in that. So I think that's exactly right, Roland. Yeah, that's a great call out. I'm like, where else is it? Great. So let me make my case. So I would argue the 12th principle is the essence of agility. And so the reason I would do that is, why are we agile? Why do we do agile? Like, why do we do Scrum? Why are we operating in an agile methodology? So I'm going to play a video here. I'm sure like probably a lot of people are familiar with this framework. This is a guy named Dave Snowden. He's going to talk us through the Cynefin framework. And I think for me, it's like the foundation of everything I think of when I like it's the foundational framework that I use every day and reflect on in my mindset all the time. And this is a video. I don't know how many people have seen it already, but it's a video of him like describing it. And I've edited it just to keep it a little tighter. But let me play it. I've seen this video probably, so I play it in every training. I've probably seen it like 70 times, and I just still watch it every single time. If you ever like follow Dave Snowden on any social media, he is like really deep thinker. Like I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And then like 3 days later, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And his like concept of like a whole organization and a complex system and like how leadership plays into that is just really well worth your time to dig into Dave Snowden. And here he is.
This is the Cynefin framework, pronounced Cynefin, for those of you who don't speak Welsh. We take the three basic systems here: ordered systems, complex systems, chaotic systems. We create a new category called disorder, and we divide order into two: simple and complicated. In the simple domain, this is an ordered system. That means the relationship between cause and effect exists, is predictable, it can be determined in advance. In simple order, that relationship is self-evident to any reasonable person, as a result of which the decision model is sense, categorize, respond. We see what's coming in, we make it fit previously determined categories, we decide what to do. The model here is that we apply best practice, a phrase which is legitimate in this domain, but illegitimate in other domains. In the complicated domain, there is a relationship between cause and effect, there is a right answer, but it's not self-evident. So I either have to deploy an analytical method, hence sense, analyze, respond, or call in experts who've built expertise within that domain who can make the right decision. Accordingly, I don't apply best practice, I apply good practice. Distinction between good and best practice is actually quite important. In a complicated domain, there are several different ways of doing things, all of which legitimate if you have the right expertise. And trying to force people to adopt one of them is actually quite dangerous. It will basically piss people off, to be honest, to the point where they won't apply best practice where it should be applied. Right? So simple and complicated we're familiar with. Sense, categorize, respond. Sense, analyze, respond. Best practice or good practice. Complexity, on the other hand, is a system without causality. It's a system of like constraints on agents. Agents modify the system. So our decision model here is probe, sense, respond. We conduct safe-fail experiments. We don't do fail-safe design. If an experiment succeeds, we amplify it. If an experiment starts to fail, we dampen it. In fact, we shouldn't even do an experiment unless we've identified our amplification and dampening strategies in advance. And of course, what happens here is we get emergent order, i.e. something which comes out of it is emergent practice, it's a new way of doing things, it's novel, it may be some combination, but it's different and it's unique. In a chaotic environment, if we enter it deliberately, it's for innovation. But if we enter it accidentally, then we need to stabilize the position quickly. So the decision model is act, sense, respond. We move very quickly to stabilize the situation. Any practice will be completely novel in terms of the way things work. Now you'll notice that that gives us a very easy way of deciding how to work, but it gives us a divergent. We sometimes call this requisite applicability. It basically says, dependent on which space you're in, you should think differently, you should analyze differently, rather than a one-size-fits-all, which has been the tradition of management theory. Now, the central space disorder, and this is key, is the space of not knowing which of the domains you're in. And that's where we are most of the time. And the trouble then is we will interpret the situation according to our personal preference for action. Now, the danger is if you spend 2 or 3 years of your life in a purely bureaucratic, process-based role, then you tend to see all problems as a failure of process. If you're a deep expert, then any problem is a failure to give you enough time or resource to do analysis. Natural complexity workers, battlefield commanders, politicians, their reaction to a crisis is to get lots of different people together from lots of different backgrounds in a desperate hope that somebody will come up with the right solution. That's actually quite a good strategy. And of course, the fascists love a crisis because then they can be given absolute command of everybody who has to do what they're told. So what you get in a normal decision environment is that people are in the disordered space, assessing the situation according to their preference for action. One of the main functions of the Cynefin framework is to allow people to say, hang on a minute, it's complex, therefore we probe, or hang on a minute, that's complicated, which expert shall we bring to bear? So the Cynefin framework is a decision framework. It's an analytical framework. It's been used for decision theory. It's been used for knowledge management. It's been used for IT design, for project management, because it recognizes the causal differences that exist between different types of system and gives people a very quick and easy way to flip between them so they can use the appropriate method for the appropriate domain.
All right, so there's so much there. Like I could talk about the Cynefin model, I could overlay it with Scrum, I could overlay it with the OODA loop. It's like just so rich. But I think for the purposes of talking about the 12th principle of the Agile Manifesto is really to talk about the differences of how we've evolved as a society, right? So we can look down, like they've also done some work on the Cynefin model. It's now called CLEAR rather than simple. So they get all 4 C's is what they're going for. So like in the old days, you know, it was pretty straightforward. We could like see a animal, we could shoot it, right? That's clear, right? This is great. This is Nike, great stuff. Just do it, right? Shoot a basket through the hoop, kick a ball in a net. That's pretty clear. But as we evolved as a society, we started dealing with all kinds of new complications, right? The agricultural revolution, right? And, developing infrastructure in Europe. And like, I think really kind of the pinnacle of the complicated domain was in the Industrial Revolution, where we were like developing very large scale machines that were doing very complicated things, meaning there was, you could track cause and effect all the way through it, and you could do enough analysis and you could find the 1,000 points on the assembly line and you get that output, right? But I think what happened is as we moved through World War II and we started to understand how to scale better and how to do things in a better way, and then we started moving into the complex realm eventually. And that really first came with aerospace and nuclear development, with rocket development, right, with biotech, and then with IT development, right? We're talking about new systems interacting, and the interaction of those systems are unknown. And now we're in the unknown domain, right? So everything on the right-hand side is predictable and knowable. We can come up with a plan, right? We can Gantt chart that out. We can come up with a Microsoft project plan and trying to follow that through. And if it is truly just complicated, we probably get to the end. I'm sure we might get thrown some curveballs, but if you move into the complex realm, all of a sudden things are unknowable, right? And I think that's what's happened is that when we transitioned from the complicated domain into the complex domain, we took our toolbox from the complicated domain with us. So we took project plans, right? We took heavy analysis, we took Gantt charts, and we moved over into this complex realm, and we started to apply those tools to the complex realm. They didn't work very well. And they work sometimes, but they would generally break and projects would go way over budget, right? I mean, think about all the DoD contracts that are billions of trillions of dollars over budget and years behind. It's because they're using complicated tools for a complex world. And so, if it's clear, just do it. That's pretty obvious. We can all try that. If it's complicated, just analyze it, and maybe that will work. But the problem comes in is when it's complex and we just analyze it, right? So how do we solve this problem when something is complex and a toolbox from the complicated domain doesn't apply? Well, we actually do have good tools that work in the complex realm, and it's called the scientific method, right? And we've been using it for 400 years, and we started using it when we started to encounter new complexities within biology, right? And the hard sciences. So really, that's the tool. And if you think about it, we had the scientific method come 400 years ago. Thank you, Sir Francis Bacon. And then what was happening in the 50s is that MacArthur was trying to rebuild a Japanese industrial base after he destroyed it in World War II. And he decided to bring in these two crackshot project managers, and they had learned a lot during World War II in America, scaling things at the industrial size. And they had started to come up with this concept of the Plan, Do, Check, Act, or the PDCA. And it turns out that they used this whole principle to build most of the Japanese industrial base, and we all know it as lean, right? So they actually applied a empirical rather than a defined process to the manufacturing domain, to the complicated domain, and it worked awesome, right? Japan ate our lunch in the 80s. There's also another concept out there called the OODA loop, Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. It's the exact same concept. It comes from Francis Boyd, I believe is his name, John Boyd. He's considered the greatest dogfighter of all time that never was in a dogfight, and he trained lots of jet pilots. Jeff Sutherland was one of those pilots to learn from him, and it's that same concept. And so during the 80s, when we were trying to keep up with Moore's law, when hardware was doubling processor speed every 18 months to 2 years, people weren't able to write software fast enough to keep up with the hardware speed. And so people like Jeff Sutherland and Kent Beck and these real big Mike Beadle and Martin Fowler started to come up with these new ideas, and they actually applied lean thinking to software development. And that's where we get the plan, do, inspect, and adapt. And so it looks a little different, right? When we do it, it's not very efficient, but it is effective. And the idea is that if we make smaller, more frequent moves, learn from experience, soliciting end user feedback, and continuously improving our process, we'll actually get to A to B as fast as possible in the complex world.
Hey, Joel, question for you. I'm thinking back about your stakeholder meeting that you had. Previously, just as in a waterfall approach, we just wanted clear requirements. If we got clear requirements, we could deliver. And I just wonder, how much have we trained our stakeholders to kind of think through, like, hey, this is just a clear problem. Like, I'm just going to give you the equation to what this metric or this KPI that needs to be calculated within the tool needs to be. Why is it so complex? Like, why is it always taking such a long time for projects? So I just think there's a little bit of a perspective shift that I really appreciate, that you probably shared similar slides with the stakeholders saying that software development is complex. Like, we need to kind of go through this process, and it's just not a clear way in terms of how we solve problems. I don't know. It's just my 2 cents in terms of what I've thought about in the past to this framework today.
Yeah, I mean, I think just understanding the difference between complicated and complex, and that there are different tools needed, and you need a different mindset in that domain, is what's key. Like in that stakeholder meeting that I had this afternoon, it was just basically trying to tell them, like, give the technical experts as much business context as possible. They'll sort out what field they need to build, right? And maybe they'll figure out that they don't need to build that field at all. Right. Or maybe they don't need that data. They know about other data that's even better, that updates faster and it has better granularity for the problem you're trying to solve. So I think just understanding that difference between complicated and complex is key. And so my point is on the 12th principle is that inspect and adapt is reflect and tune. And the reason we do Agile is because we're in a complex world and we need to use the empirical process. And that empirical process is based on inspection and adaptation, and that's what the 12th principle is calling out. So those are my slides, and now we can just have a open conversation. But I really would say that if you look at the 12th principle and you look at the reason we do Agile, they really match up really nicely.
Hi, Joe. A quick thought here. Just maybe piggyback on this chart right here. So I think my understanding is that to understand the intent, the purpose of your stakeholder, your business, what they're trying to achieve, right? And then your technical expert or SMEs can figure out how to move from A to B, or make whatever the adjust to new methodology or framework. So really understand the vision or the intent, the purpose, the user stories. Like, I want to do this so that I can do X, Y, Z, and then leave the middle part to your team, dev team. So that's my thought.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, like, I've been really struggling lately. Like, one of the bigger problems that we have within in enterprise data and analytics at Nike is I think it's an industry-wide problem, but product ownership is just really not that strong. And I have been hammering like the concept of product development, of have a product brief, get feedback before you start going, like find out who your stakeholders are. Doing all this, who are your personas, like what are you trying to accomplish, story map that out, build a backlog, get something going. And I was always like, am I emphasizing this so much that I'm just telling them to like do a bunch of upfront planning? And then I like started to come around to the idea that I'm not telling people, it's not that you are coming up with a plan and know every single step along the way, is that in order to achieve an outcome, you have to be very clear about what that outcome is, and however much time it takes to understand that vision and that outcome, you should invest. And then at that point, then it's really quick, right? I was talking to we have a new product manager that just came in, a product owner that just came into our org, and he is top notch. And I was just so impressed about how much legwork he was doing. And he would like, when he had his product brief, he came from Uber, and he said when he would take his product brief to the leadership of Uber, and if they were approved, and he would have like multiple different high level solution designs, so he could like give them different price tags on how much it would cost and stuff like that. And he said once he got the green light, he could start development the next day. And it was very easy for the actual Scrum team to do development very, very quickly because he had put in so much legwork. So I think understanding, getting super crisp on that vision, and then really empowering the team to solve for that vision is really important. So, I mean, that's kind of where I ended up there. I don't know how other people think about product development and visioning versus upfront planning.
I think one of the key points that you made there was understanding your vision well enough to be able to communicate it so that other people can understand it and act on it is super key.
Neil, how much do you emphasize that product development cycle, and do you feel like that's something that the industry struggles with?
I think every industry struggles with that, especially in the software domain for data analytics. Every company that I've ever worked with has struggled with understanding what they're trying to get to. And most of the developer teams don't understand the business side of what the metrics are that they're trying to measure and why it's important. And they're struggling to get that vision and understanding to be able to put it into a dashboard and analytics framework that can be utilized on a regular basis to actually monitor and make improvements.
Yeah, that's exactly exactly my experience. Anybody else? Ruth, do you have any experience on that as well, with visioning and coaching that?
Sorry, I was just swallowed something. Yeah, I think that the visioning, I think that a lot of times we start out with a very clear vision, but as we move forward, that's where the inspect adapt is so critical. where a lot of times people don't understand or really understand what the vision is until they start seeing it created. So that gives us that opportunity to fine tune and adjust and maybe make those small shifts that are necessary to end up with a product or software product that the stakeholder really wants. So vision is very often defined and very clear up front, but until they see it, they don't really know. So that's why it's very important to do this incrementally and often with stakeholders and team members.
Yeah.
Ruth, I'll add to what you're saying. Vision up front. On a quarterly basis, we had something that we actually called vision briefing. That we bring back everyone back in the same room, all the stakeholders of our product that we're delivering, because that was really key to just give them that refresher and say, all right, this is where we're going to head in the next quarter. And that was just, that unlocks some aha moments for our business teams and say, oh yeah, this is what these guys do. So I just think it's not just once, but it's like, you have to keep doing it. I mean, we're just so busy with work anyways. It's important that you just keep that up every quarter, at least, I would say, at a minimum.
Right.
Yeah, right. It's a living document. Yeah. I also realize it's like we're so busy trying to do these little tactical things. Heaven forbid we take a day to like step back and really think about what we're doing. Like it drives me crazy. Like if I could just get I love that concept of, so this past quarter, or the beginning of the fiscal year, ED&A and Nike got a giant we got like 13 initiatives that we were given, and we just all the leaders just accepted them. And then we started doing something else. And I was like, I pulled the and-on cord. I'm like, the teams don't even know what this work is. And I forced them all to do a product brief. And somehow, some miracle, I got them to do it. But getting them to revisit that and to update that, because they've learned a ton, right? They know way more now, 12 weeks later than they did when they wrote that product brief. I go into the product brief folder and nothing's been touched for 12 weeks. So that's like trying to communicate how important, like just an extra day of investment here makes the rest of your quarter so much easier. But people have a real hard time slowing down and get pulling themselves.
And it's always good to relate it back to money by taking that time to reflect and adapt to possible changes in how they do their work or what the outcome is, can save them a vast amount of money. If they are down the wrong path for a month, doing the work and working really hard, and even a team member can be very focused on doing the right thing, and they think they're on focus, and if they're down that path and they don't take the time to check where they're at, what people want, it could be time wasted, and time wasted is money, and money really is what businesses are about, because if they can't make money, they can't survive. So sometimes presenting it to stakeholders or team members who care about the money part of it it's an important way to reflect why it's important to reflect.
Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes it's really not their money and they really don't care.
Yeah.
I just asked for it and it comes, so that's good. I don't have to earn it. The problem I struggle with on the back end. Other thoughts?
I really think that to have proper retrospectives or the mindset of like check and adapt, that there has to be an environment of safety, of trust, to throw something out there that may be, hey, you know what, this user story, or this was a huge pain point for our team, and if we don't allow or create that environment for the people that we work with, man, it's really hard to be authentic in terms of really being agile. Honestly, I just feel like if we're not creating that type of work environment for people to share feedback, man, we're going to get cut off at the knees pretty soon.
Yeah.
The reason that I jumped into this, even though it's the last one of the year, my first time here, glad to be here though, is because my current focus is how to increase the effectiveness of specifically my retrospective. I also do a lot of one-on-ones. I give my time within reason, but more or less unstintingly to anybody who is facing trouble with jumping into Agile and making it and applying their work or applying it to their work. And that's all going really well. But the retrospective can be kind of crickets sometimes. and so I suppose what I'd be interested in hearing more of, and somehow it's the end of the day, Roland, and something you said triggered this thought, but I don't know what it was, is what do you do to what are some things you've done to proactively increase the participation, the activity within your retrospective, and keep the value of the retrospective in front of people, keep the momentum going?
Yeah, I think number one, I love being creative within a retrospective. If we just kind of say, okay, went bad, went well, what do we need to continue? Like that to me is like we get kind of bored of that. And I think we just, I don't know, we don't really get after it. And so like, I love that a Scrum coach of mine, he showed the rocket ship, of like, hey, what's the fuel that's taking us up higher? What's the drag that's bringing us down? And just creative ways, number one, to kind of get the juices flowing. Number one, another thing that I did was I really listened to my Scrum Master, like when he was observing some things. And so he actually asked me, and this is me being totally transparent. He said, Roland, sometimes, our engineers don't want to speak up because you're in the room. You help set the goals and they feel like they're disappointing you if all of a sudden they're coming up with pain points. And so he said, step out of the room. I'll share the notes with you just so you know. Of course, I'm not going to put attribution to it. And then, as long as the team starts seeing that, hey, Roland's going to start taking action. If I've created pain for my team, I think there's some benefit to that, So I would say sometimes the audience can impact, or sometimes the participants can impact the benefit of a retrospective as well. And then the team's got to see the actions being taken on those things where we need to improve as well. If that doesn't happen, people are less likely to jump in there and help out. I don't know. What do you guys think? Does that kind of resonate with your guys' experience as well?
Yeah, I think that the having the team commit to certain actions and find a way to follow through on those actions. There's different methods to do that, to make them visible and make them actionable. And, depending on what they are, if they can be assigned a person or, as long as we follow up on the action items and make some movement towards those, then people will listen and know that these conversations are not just a waste of time, but they actually do help move the needle. So we want to make sure that we understand what's in it for them and how to make things better.
I mean, I feel like there's always two elements of the retrospective, right? There's that psychological safety, and then there's that process improvement. But it sounds like what you guys are saying is it's actually by showing action on the process improvement, you start to build trust that will create that psychological safety.
Yeah, I would say for sure that helps loosen things. If there's a log jam, like people want to see action, right? That's right. We're evolving, so we need to demonstrate that.
Yeah, they'll lose faith in the retrospective and the usefulness of their time spent at a retrospective if they don't feel that the actions that they bring up have any value or anyone cares enough to follow up on them. So we need to follow up on action items. We need to limit them so they are reasonable. If we just have one or two action items that come out of a retrospective that can be worked on, it's very important to keep engagement with the team.
I don't know how, I can see how there's a direct connection between a follow through on action items creating more psychological safety. but it's also a new thought to me, because when I've talked about psychological safety in the retro before, it's been a matter of more emotional safety, or feeling confident that you're not going to get attacked for what you're saying, or that when you didn't bring 100% to work that day or that week or yesterday, and you know that there's something going on in your life that's caused an issue, and instead of being confident in your team's ability to understand why you weren't at 100% yesterday, you try and hide it. Like avoiding those situations and creating the psychological safety where a team can come together, look at what wasn't 100% yesterday, and not cast blame, not let a negative feedback loop become part of the norm. That's where I've more identified the psychological safety part.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to sort of add in here too, to build on what Kay's saying about that psychological safety. For me, that is really about someone else demonstrating that it's okay for me to say, there were things that I could have done differently or would have liked to have done differently next time, and these are the things. And be that person who sets the example for being critical of your own work, while at the same time showing others that it's okay to be retrospective. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense to me, Jennifer. I was thinking about, so if your team members start to acknowledging your things that you can do better, show how vulnerable you are. I think that might encourage others also open up, say, okay, I could do this better. I messed that up. So that helped to, I think, in my opinion, foster the trust, so people be more straightforward, frank with each other, and build that commitment maybe to each other. One of the Scrum values, maybe.
Absolutely.
Occasionally, I will see a problem coming, let it happen, so we can model how we deal with it. If nothing's ever allowed to go wrong, nobody knows how the team's going to respond when something does go wrong. You have to have the failure to be able to succeed.
Jeff, I really like that example of carving out a space for people to fail and learn. I feel like that you have to allow people that, right? And not catching them or making them feel bad about it, but also just saying, hey, this is a great learning opportunity. Let's be empirical about this, and how can we improve it? I think that's really cool that you allow that space to do that.
When I was interviewing to join a team, I'd often ask, what was the last big failure you had? And I don't listen both for it. They know what it is, are willing to admit it, and how did they deal with it? If they don't know what it is, that's a big warning sign, because they're not admitting failure. If they didn't deal with it well, that's also a big warning sign.
I play this video, and they interview this woman in it, and she talks about should view like failure like a trampoline. Like, you have to go down and go back up, and if you don't go down, you're not going to go back up, right? And I also think, like, what does learning look like? Oh, that looks like failure too, right? And so if you like, one of the things I always run into is I have like these like command and control like tech leads that see the problem coming, Jeff, to your point, and like prevent it from ever happening, and don't let the teams feel and experience what it's like to like design something that's going to break, and then it breaks, and then they learn how to not design it that way again. And like that is just so hard to get more traditional leaders to understand that the benefit in letting their team fail pays huge dividends, you know.
Yeah, Joe, just to pile on your example, I remember watched the YouTube video, I think published by SpaceX, the title called "How Not to Land a Rocket," or the "Of Course I Still Love You" ship. I think it's so cool. Obviously SpaceX, they just really encourage. They failed so many times before they finally succeed with the Falcon 9, right? In 2000, I forgot 10 or 11. So that's really a great example about using innovation, trying, learning until they figure out how this engines works, Falcon Heavy, stuff.
I really like that question of what does learning look like? I've never thought about that before. And I think sometimes in our mind, we think that, like I was saying, learning, we think it should look like you don't make any mistakes and that you learn it and you're good, right? But I love that example of the trampoline going up and down, that it's just like the stock market, like it's not a linear line, it's up and down. Hopefully it's going up, right? It's getting better.
Yeah, if you say what does learning look like and someone says a straight A student, then you have a problem, right?
Thank you, Jennifer, for posting the link to how to not land a rocket.
My pleasure.
Thank you. So I don't mean to off through this conversation off track, but I'm thinking a book recently I'm reading is No Rules by Reid Hastings, about how they Netflix, they really encourage people to take a risk. If you might be fired for not taking a risks. It's not because you fail, but if you had to give like company-wide presentation saying so what you had learned from the failure, and that's okay. But if you don't fail, you might get fired. So I'm just curious if anyone has read start reading the book, or if I highly recommend.
What was that book called?
No, I think it's called No Rules.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, highly recommend, I guess.
All right, we just have a few minutes left. Any other thoughts on the I just what is I'm trying to think of the actual, I think it's the reflect in tune. It's on the 12th principle. Well, all right.
I think,
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, a part of that is creating that level of safety so that when they do reflect and find that there's something that possibly could come to be done differently or done better, that they give themselves space to experiment and make that even safe by putting a limit on how long does that experiment last before we start reflecting back to the results of that experiment. Was that a good approach? Did that help put us in a better place or not? We always want to experiment to find out what is going to work and what isn't going to work. But in order for a team to have those experiments, they need to feel safe and know that failing is okay. It's okay to try something new, and it might not be the right approach. And as long as we create that level of safety to enable them to experiment, then that will help move the needle.
That's such a great point, Ruth. Roland shared with us before how he kind of, in a safer space, helped them exercise that muscle of trying something new. Roland, could you tell us about that?
So just in team meetings, we would do life skills. And so people brought, whether it was Bollywood dancing or how to set up a tent, just different things that people wanted to learn. And so, right, we all looked a little goofy, maybe doing something for the first time, but that was okay, right? I don't know. We had a backlog, we refined it. We said, okay, let's learn American football, let's learn cricket or something else. And so, yeah, it just kind of created that ability to be vulnerable, which was just a lot of fun on our side. Yeah. And Ruth, to your point in that experiment, the mindset that I had with my team and that I love saying is, I love when we break things. Like, yes, it's broken.
Yes.
Let's go fix it. Oh, I love it when we break things. They're always looking at me like, really? Is that okay? I'm like, yeah. Our code will be stronger.
Yeah.
We'll be better next time. So that was kind of a little mantra of our team. I love breaking things.
I love that your mantra doesn't include move fast, and we like breaking things, because to refer back to what we said earlier, it's like how it's so hard to get people to pause for a second, to take a step back and to be like, okay, is this still the case? Now that we've broken it, should we build it out of that material again?
Right.
so it's like break things, pause, and observe the work of art that is the chaos in front of you.
Yeah, that's where the learning comes from.
That's where the PDSA comes in. Plan, do, study, act. Study a result of your experiment, which you defined in your plan stage. You executed it in your do stage. You study the results, and then you make further action for future benefit of the organization.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, like Joel mentioned earlier, these tools are transferable between methodologies, and we have to keep that in mind as we're learning and growing and utilizing them in our day-to-day life. They're there for us to use, not because they're there from somebody else's niche market of where they developed it. It's how do you apply this learning to what I'm doing today? And that's where reflection and tuning comes in. Tools can be used in any industry. It's all about understanding how to apply them.
Yeah, Neil, you're just touching such a good point with that whole study and fine tuning. Like there's buzzwords of fail fast, but is there really that opportunity to study why we failed and what do we need to do to get better, right? If we just keep failing, if we're not checking and adapting or whatever, like we're just going to keep failing. Like that's a buzzword that I've always struggled with because it doesn't insert that need to review of why we failed.
Mm-hmm.
It should be learn fast. That's what it's really trying to get at, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think one that I haven't quite heard yet too is like be there for your developers when they failed. And I think it taps in, to kind of that supportive network, but like actually being there for the person, whose code broke something, or, working with them and other senior developers, especially if there's like not that kind of trust on the team, or just connecting people together, because, in that PM role, a lot of the time you are the linchpin for, whatever org you happen to be a part of, and you might know who they need to turn to. So it could be very helpful for, a more junior developer or somebody who's going through a hard time in their life to hear that, they have some support.
I like sharing stories of failure. Telling the team about the time I once deleted 6 months of work out of the shared repository, and then watching someone else try to one-up that. Your developer doesn't worry so much about making a single bug anymore, because it could blow it up so much worse.
Well, Star, I want to thank you for inviting me and talking to you. It's also just a pleasure seeing so many people that I've been able to connect with over the last couple of years. I got a family waiting upstairs for dinner, so I got to go, but it was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, and it's great seeing all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Thank you.